Cynthia hesitated outside Dr. Martens's office, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. The long, dimly lit hallway of the university's faculty building was nearly empty, save for a few students rushing to their next class. She gripped her notebook tightly, her palms sweaty as she took a deep breath. She didn't want to be here. The lecturer had sent her several messages summoning her to his office. At first, she ignored them, hoping he would forget. But then the threats started subtle at first, hidden between casual conversations about her coursework. Then, in his last message, there was no subtlety at all. "Cynthia, I need to see you in my office today. I don't have time to keep reminding you. You know what's at stake." She had barely scraped through the last test in his course. If she failed, she would have to repeat the entire semester. Her parents had sacrificed so much for her education failure wasn't an option. With a final, shaky breath, she knocked. "Come in," came the deep voice from within. She stepped inside, forcing herself to look composed. Dr. Martin sat behind his desk, dressed in a neatly pressed white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his tie slightly loosened. He was a man in his mid-40s with a commanding presence, a sharp goatee, and the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. Cynthia," he said smoothly, reclining in his chair as if he had all the time in the world. "I was starting to think you were ignoring me." She swallowed. I've been busy with schoolwork, sir." Dr. Martens chuckled, shaking his head. "Schoolwork, huh? Well, let's talk about that." He picked up a sheet of paper, her last graded assignment, and held it up. A big red D was scrawled across the top. "You're struggling in my course," he continued, watching her carefully. "At this rate, you'll fail, and I don't think you want that." Cynthia's throat went dry. "Sir, I'll work harder. I can improve." He raised a hand, silencing her. "That's not what I'm suggesting." He stood up and walked around the desk, moving closer to her. She instinctively took a step back. "You're a smart girl," he said, lowering his voice. "You must know how things work here. Many students have come to me with the same problem, and I've helped them in exchange for their cooperation." Cynthia stiffened. The air in the room suddenly felt suffocating. I don't understand," she whispered, though deep down she knew exactly what he meant. Dr. Martin smirked, his eyes scanning her like she was prey. "Don't play dumb, Cynthia. You know what I want. A little extra effort outside the classroom and I'll make sure you pass." Tears stung her eyes as she clenched her fists. She had heard whispers about how Dr. Martens preyed on female students, how some disappeared into his office only to leave looking broken. But hearing it firsthand, being the target of his proposition, made her stomach turn. "I can't," she choked out, shaking her head. "Please, sir, I just want to pass fairly." The smirk on his face vanished. His expression darkened, and his voice turned cold. "Fairly? Do you think you're the first girl to say that? Let me tell you what's fair, Cynthia. I have the power to decide your future. You either do as I say or you fail. Simple." Tears finally spilled onto her cheeks as she turned away, gripping the doorknob so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Think about it," he called after her as she hurried out, slamming the door behind her. She didn't stop running until she was outside the building, gasping for air. The worst part? She knew that if she reported him, no one would believe her. Cynthia sat under a tree near the faculty building, her mind racing. The warm afternoon sun did little to comfort her trembling body. She replayed the encounter over and over in her head, her stomach knotting with disgust and fear. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. The whispers about Dr. Martens had been going around for years. Everyone knew, but no one did anything about it. Some girls had mysteriously dropped out of school, others had failed repeatedly, and the ones who stayed silent and cooperated graduated with perfect grades. It was a well-oiled machine of fear and silence. Cynthia knew that if she reported him, it would be her word against his. Dr. Martens was a respected lecturer with years of experience and powerful connections within the university. He wasn't just another professor, he was untouchable. She had seen it happen before. When Halima, a final-year student, had tried to speak up about him 2 years ago, she was suddenly accused of exam malpractice. The university disciplinary panel had expelled her within weeks. It was as if she had never existed. Cynthia clenched her fists. She couldn't let that happen to her. But what could she do? She looked around at the other students, laughing, chatting, carrying on with their day as if the world wasn't filled with monsters hiding behind power and respectability. If she failed Dr. Martin's course, her future would be ruined. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from one of her friends, Vera. "Vera, girl, are you okay? You've been acting strange since morning. Talk to me." Cynthia hesitated, then typed back. "Cynthia, can we meet? It's serious." Within minutes, Vera was there. She was one of the few people Cynthia truly trusted. A sharp-minded law student, Vera had always been outspoken about injustices on campus, but even she knew there were lines that couldn't be crossed. When Cynthia told her what had happened, Vera's face twisted in anger. "That bastard!" she hissed. "I knew he was doing this, but I didn't have proof." "What do I do?" Cynthia whispered, her voice breaking. "If I refuse, he'll fail me. If I report him, I might get expelled like Halima." Vera took a deep breath, her eyes burning with determination. "You're right. If you go up against him alone, you'll lose." She paused. "But what if you weren't alone?" Cynthia frowned. "What do you mean?" Vera leaned in, lowering her voice. "We find others. Other girls who have been through this. We collect evidence. If we can prove it, if we can expose him in a way that the university can't ignore, it won't be able to escape this time." Cynthia's heart pounded. Could they really do this? Could they really take down the man everyone was too afraid to fight? The next lecture with Dr. Martens felt different. The air in the hall was thick with tension, but only a few could sense it. For Vera, every second she spent in that room felt like a countdown to a confrontation that she was not willing to back down from. She sat upright in the middle row, her eyes locked onto Dr. Martens as he spoke. Cynthia sat beside her, shifting uncomfortably, but Vera didn't move. Her heartbeat was steady, her mind sharp. Dr. Martens carried himself as he always did, full of arrogance, his tone dripping with authority. He was untouchable, or so he believed. But today, Vera saw him differently. She saw a man whose time was running out. Halfway through the lecture, Dr. Martens' gaze landed on her. His lips curled into a smirk as he continued his lesson, his words blending into a dull hum in Vera's ears. Then, just as she expected, his voice cut through the room. "Vera, see me in my office after class." A few students turned their heads, some with curiosity, others with quiet understanding. Vera felt Cynthia's hand tighten into a fist beside her. When the class ended, Cynthia grabbed her wrist. "Are you sure about this?" Vera gave a firm nod. "It's time." Cynthia hesitated. "Be careful." Vera took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and made her way to Dr. Martens' office. The hallway leading to his office was almost empty, save for a few students loitering around. The closer she got, the more the walls seemed to close in on her, but she wouldn't back down. She knocked once. "Come in," his voice called out smoothly. She stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. Dr. Martens was seated, leaning back in his chair with an air of amusement. His office was filled with shelves of books, certificates hanging on the wall, symbols of his so-called prestige. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." Vera remained standing. His smirk faltered slightly. "You don't want to waste my time, do you?" Vera folded her arms. "I know what you've been doing." Dr. Martens raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I know about Amaka, about Cynthia, about all the girls you've threatened." Her voice was steady, filled with quiet rage. "It ends today." A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "You think you're brave, don't you?" He leaned forward. "Do you know how many girls have tried to fight me? Do you know where they are now? They failed, Vera, just like you will." Vera's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "You won't be able to silence me." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're making a mistake. I control what happens here. I can fail you, make sure you never graduate. I can make life very difficult for you." Vera clenched her fists. "Go ahead, fail me. But this time it won't be just another girl crying in silence. This time everyone will know exactly who you are." Dr. Martens' smirk wavered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Vera." His tone was quieter now, more measured. "Do you really think anyone will believe you? Do you think you can win against me?" Vera took a step forward, planting her hands on his desk. I don't need people to believe me, Dr. Martins. I just need them to listen. For the first time, the arrogance in his eyes dulled, replaced by something else concern. Not fear, not yet, but doubt. Vera turned on her heel and walked to the door. I'll be watching, he called after her, his voice laced with warning. She paused for only a second before stepping out, closing the door behind her. Her heart pounded as she made her way down the corridor. She had done it. She had stood up to him. But this was only the beginning. Dr. Martins wasn't the type of man to back down easily. As she rounded the corner, Cynthia rushed up to her, her face tight with worry. What happened? Vera inhaled deeply. He tried to threaten me, but I didn't back down. Cynthia's eyes widened. And? Vera's lips pressed into a determined line. Now we expose him. That night, Vera sat in her small dorm room, staring at her laptop screen. She had already gathered testimonies from other victims' girls who had whispered their pain but never dared to speak up. Now she had a choice. She could go to the school authorities, or she could take matters into her own hands. She opened a new document and began typing. My name is Vera, and I am a student at Bright Future University. This is my story, but it is not just mine alone. It belongs to every girl who has suffered in silence. It belongs to those who were too afraid to fight back, and it starts with a man named Dr. Martins. With every word she wrote, Vera knew she was walking into a storm, but for the first time, she felt free. Dr. Martins was not a man who took threats lightly. The morning after Vera's confrontation with him, a chill ran through the lecture hall as he walked in. He carried himself with his usual air of authority, but there was something sharper in his gaze, something unsettling. His eyes swept across the room until they landed on Vera. She didn't look away. He smiled cold, calculated. Good morning, class. The students mumbled their response, shifting in their seats. Dr. Martins took his time arranging his notes before looking up again. I have gone through the mid-semester test results, he announced, and I must say I'm extremely disappointed. A ripple of anxiety moved through the class. He flipped open a folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. Vera! The room fell silent. Cynthia stiffened beside her. Vera's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. Yes, sir. Dr. Martins held up the paper. You failed. A few whispers broke out. Vera had never failed a test in her life. Cynthia turned to her wide-eyed. This is just the beginning, she whispered. Vera clenched her fists. She expected retaliation, but not this soon, not this openly. Dr. Martins tilted his head. Would you like to see your script? Perhaps you believe there has been a mistake. His voice dripped with mockery. Vera knew better than to take the bait. She met his gaze and forced a smile. No, sir, I understand. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was expecting her to fight back. She wouldn't not yet. After the lecture, she found herself surrounded by concerned classmates. But you answered everything correctly, one of them whispered. He's punishing you, another muttered. Cynthia grabbed Vera's arm. You need to be careful. Vera took a deep breath. I knew he'd come after me, but I won't stop. The following days were worse. Her assignments were marked down unfairly. Her name was called out repeatedly in class for no reason. Even some of her lecturers began treating her differently. Cold glances, silent warnings. And then came the message. One evening, as Vera sat in her dorm room typing up her report against Dr. Martins, her phone buzzed. A private number. She hesitated before picking up. Hello? A deep, calm voice came through. I warned you, Vera. She gripped the phone tighter. Dr. Martins. A chuckle. You think you're smart? You think you can go against me? Vera forced herself to stay calm. I know I can. There was silence, then a low, menacing laugh. You will regret this. The line went dead. Vera stared at the phone. Cynthia, who had been watching from her bed, sat up. Was that? Vera nodded. Cynthia swallowed hard. Vera, he's dangerous. Vera exhaled. So am I. Dr. Martins was trying to break her. He was using fear, power, intimidation, but Vera had already made her decision. She wasn't going to stop. Vera knew she couldn't take down Dr. Martins with words alone. He was too powerful, too connected. If she was going to expose him, she needed proof, undeniable evidence that even the university administration couldn't ignore. She spent nights brainstorming with Cynthia, weighing their options. "We need something concrete," Cynthia insisted. "If we don't have proof, it'll just be your word against his." Vera exhaled. "I know, but how do we get it? He's too careful." Then an idea struck her. "He records everything." Cynthia frowned. "What?" "His office," Vera explained. "Every time a girl walks in, he locks the door. He always has his laptop open, maybe for emails, but what if he records those meetings?" Cynthia's eyes widened. "You think he keeps evidence of his own crimes?" "It wouldn't be the first time," Vera said. "Some men like him keep trophies, proof of their power. If I can get into his laptop, I might find something." Cynthia bit her lip. "That's risky, Vera. If he catches you..." "I won't get caught." The next step was crucial. Vera had to find a way to get into Dr. Martin's office alone. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. A few days later, Dr. Martin sent her a message. "Meet me in my office. We need to discuss your grades." Vera stared at the text, her heart pounding. This was her chance. Cynthia gripped her hand. "Are you sure about this?" Vera nodded. "I have to be." When she arrived at his office, Dr. Martin's was already waiting. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smug smile on his face. "I knew you'd come to your senses," he said smoothly. Vera forced herself to stay calm. She glanced at his laptop. It was open, just as she had hoped. "You've been making a lot of noise, Vera," he continued. "But let's be honest, you can't win. No one will believe you." Vera swallowed her anger. "I just want to pass my course, sir." Dr. Martin smiled, pleased. "That's more like it." He stood up, moving to pour himself a drink. That was her moment. With steady hands, Vera slipped a flash drive into his laptop and clicked a few keys. A small notification appeared, files transferring. She could hear him talking, but his voice faded as her focus narrowed. She scanned his folders quickly, her heart racing. Then she saw it. A hidden folder titled Special Sessions. Her stomach turned. The progress bar on the screen inched forward, almost there. Dr. Martins turned around, drink in hand. Vera yanked the flash drive out and forced a smile. "I think I understand now," she said. "Maybe we can work something out." Dr. Martins grinned. "Now you're being smart." Vera nodded, gripping the flash drive in her pocket. "May I go now?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Of course. But remember, Vera, I'm not a patient man." She stepped out of the office, her heart thundering in her chest. As soon as the door shut behind her, she bolted. She had the evidence. Now it was time to end him. Vera's hands trembled as she plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Cynthia sat beside her, gripping her arm. "Are you ready for this?" Cynthia asked. Vera swallowed hard. "I have to be." She double-clicked the folder titled Special Sessions. The screen filled with video files, each labeled with a date and a name. Some went back years. Vera's stomach twisted as she scrolled through them. These weren't just records, these were trophies. Proof of doctor. Cynthia covered her mouth. "Oh my God. Vera, this is huge." Vera clicked on one of the files. The video played. A girl, barely older than Vera, sat stiffly in Dr. Martin's office. His voice was smooth, coaxing, filled with false concern. Then, as the girl hesitated, his tone shifted, threatening, firm. "This is enough," Vera said, closing her laptop. "We take this to the school board." Cynthia hesitated. "What if they cover it up?" Vera exhaled. "Then we go public." The next morning, Vera and Cynthia walked into the dean's office. Dean Attawale, a strict but fair man, raised an eyebrow as they placed the flash drive on his desk. "What is this?" he asked. "Evidence," Vera said, "of Dr. Martin's crimes." The dean inserted the flash drive into his computer. As the first video played, his face darkened. His jaw tightened. He stopped the video and looked at them. "Does anyone else know about this?" Vera nodded. "Not yet. But if nothing is done, we'll go to the media." The dean rubbed his temples. He knew the weight of the scandal this would bring. Finally, he sighed. "Leave this with me." Vera clenched her fists. "And if you bury it?" The dean met her eyes. "I won't." 2 days later, a disciplinary committee was assembled. Dr. Martens was summoned. He walked into the meeting room with his usual arrogance, but when he saw the flash drive on the table, his confidence wavered. One by one, the committee members played the recordings. The room was silent, thick with tension. Dr. Martens' face paled. This is an invasion of privacy," he barked. The dean leaned forward. "This is proof of your abuse of power, Dr. Martens. Do you deny it?" Dr. Martens opened his mouth, then closed it. He was trapped. The university wasted no time. By the end of the week, Dr. Martens was officially dismissed and handed over to the authorities. News spread like wildfire. Students whispered in hallways, social media exploded with outrage, and former victims began coming forward. Vera watched it all unfold, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over her. She had done it. She had exposed him. The university's swift action seemed to be a turning point for many who had turned a blind eye before. As he sat in the back of a police car, his future uncertain, he couldn't help but reflect on the past. His life had been defined by power, control, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he could ruin anyone who dared to defy him. But now, all that power had been stripped away. He had underestimated the strength of those he thought he could break. Vera had become his undoing, and in the end, she was the one who had taken away the very thing he had used to dominate other Shiz power. It was a bitter lesson, but one he would never forget. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell.